correct hang on that. I don't have a title because, like you said, I was just working on this last night, so bear with me, I guess. I'm sure everybody's had the same experience as I have. You watch the news, you see an interview with a political elected official, and they ask all these questions, and they get to a point in their interview where they'll make a statement. They'll say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. But they say that and you have no idea what they're talking about. Either it doesn't make sense, or you don't agree with them, or just whatever. For example, with the recent debt limit and the budget deficit, there was a lot of talk about, let's raise the tax on the rich. So to me, that's a great statement. Okay, I personally believe that because I'm a Democrat. So what exactly does that mean? In my opinion, since I'm a tax guru, is what I like to think of myself, that raises more questions than it answers. Well, what is increase? Do you mean 1%? Do you mean 10%? Who's rich? Is rich 100,000? Is it 200,000? Maybe somebody who earns $1 million. So again, it raises more questions than it answers. And the problem with that statement, the pure statement of increase the tax on the rich, is that it's based on generic words. The generic words of increase and rich. And so when you use generic words, a lot of the times you're forcing the audience to make an assumption. The audience has to assume, well, raise means 5%. Well, rich means 100,000. And the problem with the assumptions is that they're always based on the individual's perception. So Maureen might think raise is 5%, where Chris might think raise is 20%. So you're always getting these battles back and forth of what Maureen thinks this person is talking about versus what Chris thinks this person is talking about. And obviously, when the speaker uses generic words, they're allowing the audience to put words into their mouth instead of letting the speaker convey his or her own message. So I'm sure if I were to go around the room, we would get the exact same problem. I'm sure we'd get as many different assumptions as we have the number of people in this room. So what I'm here today to talk about is, instead of using generic words like increase and rich, let's use specific words. So let's say, instead of increase, we're going to increase 3.25%. Instead of rich, let's say people who earn $1 million in 1 year. Those are specific words, and you don't leave any room for the interpretation. The audience can't put words in your mouth because you've already told them exactly what you want to do. And I understand that the political world is very unique. Obviously, politicians either don't have insights into the problems that they're dealing with, or they want to hide the ball. So it's hard to say politicians should use specific words because they have a stake in the game and they know exactly what they're doing. But where it does come up, obviously, in a lot of personal, everyday conversations. So what we can do to fix this, there are three ways we can fix this. One is obviously to use more specific words. Instead of saying raise, let's say raise 3.25%. Or instead of saying rich, maybe we could say somebody who earns $1 million, like I said. Now this is obviously easier said than done because there's so many different words in the English language, and maybe we're not exactly sure what we're wanting to say. So obviously it depends on what you're talking about. If you're trying to say a fact or a statement, it's easier to say raise at 3.25%. But if you're using a description, it's obviously more difficult because if you want to say somebody's rich, you want to say Bill Gates is rich, well, I'm sure somebody knows his net worth, but I personally don't, and I'm not going to go look it up before I make that comment. So one thing you could say is he's not poor, or he obviously has no problems with money. Something, you can use the complement of rich. Instead of saying rich, just say poor. Just kind of the opposite. And then the second thing you can do, and on a similar path, is to not use pronouns. I think pronouns are becoming overused, maybe with social media and texting and just email communication. I think I've experienced a lot of people saying he, she, they, that for everything they talk about. And I personally, I work with a coworker, and she'll tell me a story about two men, and she'll say, oh, he did this, and he did that. Who are you talking about? There's two he's in the story. You can't say he did this, he did that. So I spend more time asking clarifying questions than talking about the actual story. And that not only applies to people, but it applies to things and objects. Instead of saying that is a problem, say the debt limit is a problem, or budget deficit is a problem. And the third thing you can do is to define the terms you're using. So going back to the increase the taxes on the rich, you can say, when I say rich, I mean somebody who earns $1 million. Or if I say increase the taxes, you say increase the income tax on their ordinary income versus capital gains, because that's obviously one big problem that we're running into recently. And one thing, if you look at statutes, the law, or legal contracts, you always see a list of descriptions of definition terms, because that is constantly a problem with interpretation of contracts. One party will say, I want X widgets, and the other party thinks a widget is something else. So you always run into the problems of, well, what did you mean by when you said that? So if you define exactly what you mean, you decrease the opportunity for misinterpretation. And that, like I said, like Hank said, I'm a political junkie, so every morning I watch the show, Morning Joe. It's a political show, and they have everybody. I mean, they have politicians, musicians, just kind of, it's a good mix of people. But they were just kind of joking around this morning. They said, they were having an argument about toasters. They said, oh, we can't use the toaster for that. No, we use the toaster for this. And one person was talking about the old-fashioned toasters where you just put the bread in, you push the button down, and the other guy was talking about the toaster oven. So the fact that they were using the same term to mean two different, very different objects shows that when you need to define the terms you're using instead of just assuming that somebody else knows exactly what you're talking about. So obviously today I've shown how generic language can cause miscommunication in the workplace and in daily life. So if everybody could just try and spend a little effort and think about using specific words instead of generic words, I think we'll be able to effectively communicate.